Hi everyone, my name is Sunanda, and today we're going to be talking about effective decision making. Product managers make a lot of decisions, and while I wish I could just flip a coin to make all my decisions, that's not how it works. Over the years, I've experimented with a lot of different frameworks and thought really hard about how to make better decisions that are faster, more concise, and clearer for everyone. So today's talk is my attempt to put all of my learnings together with the hope that you can take away something positive from it. So before we get started, let me just introduce myself. I went to the University of Toronto where I did my undergrad in engineering, worked at a few small and large companies, including BlackBerry at the time, back when they were still making phones. Then I moved to Seattle a few years ago to start working at Microsoft and also get my MBA from the University of Washington. I've always worked at Azure within Microsoft, which is its cloud computing division. And currently, I'm working on this new business within Azure called confidential computing. Okay, so I want to start by talking about what is an effective decision. An effective decision is really one which is thoughtful, timely, considers all the relevant factors, is consistent with the values of the company or the organization you're making the decision for, and can be explained clearly when talking to stakeholders. So why is effective decision-making so important? I think there are three main reasons that I want to cover here. The first is, as PMs, you're at the center of a lot of decisions. You're going to be making some small decisions that you can make relatively easily just by yourself, such as enhancing your product or deciding which feature to take on the next, or deciding how to fine-tune some problem areas. But there may be some large decisions that need more collaboration with a lot more people that can change the overall direction of your product and the business. And these pivotal decisions can sometimes be irreversible. So it's important to have a good process when encountered with these type of large, high-risk decisions. Some of the decisions that I've had to make that I think fall in this category are thinking about whether we want to launch a new offering as a completely new product or something part of an existing line that is an added capability. Or thinking about whether you want to expand in a new region or not. These are some of the decisions where you want to deliberately think through and have a good process before jumping to a conclusion. The second is that decision-making is a really good tool to generate clarity and make sure things get done. Decisions cut through ambiguity. I really love this quote from our CEO, Satya, that says, the most important attribute of any leader is to create clarity when none exists. If things are ambiguous for a long time, it leads to misalignment amongst team members and can cause a lot of delays. Clear decisions propel a plan forward towards its goal. And PMs are often looked at during ambiguous times to create clarity. And lastly, effective decision-making buys you credibility and trust with the stakeholders. Decision makers are judged on the outcome of their decisions, and good decision-making buys you credibility. But we shouldn't confuse the decision-making process with the outcome. I think you can have a bad decision-making process and have a good outcome. And what that really does is just build confidence in a bad process, which can hurt you in the long term. So even if you sometimes make bad decisions, which I think everybody does, just having a good process that you can course correct and back up when asked questions is really important when making large, high-stake decisions. Okay, so let's talk about why making decisions is so difficult. First off, I think we tend to associate effective decisions with having data. How many times have you heard the term data-driven decision-making, or let's be more data-driven? And data can be a huge ally when it comes to driving decisions and provide clear insight required for our decisions. But in reality, what I've kind of experienced is that we don't really have all the data we need. And if we wait until we've collected all the data, I think we waited for too long. So there's a 40-70 rule, which says that you should not make a decision unless you have at least 40% of the information you need and no more than 70% of the data. So if you have less than 40% of the information, chances are that you really don't have enough data to make the judgment But if you're waiting to get more than 70% of the data, sometimes you've waited for too long and somebody else would have caught you in that process. So trying to get more and more data can sometimes actually lead to this analysis paralysis where you end up becoming more indecisive and just causing delays. And you don't want to be in that situation. So you need to use the data you have with your judgment and intuition. Data is really good to back up your decision, but through experience, you also have to use your judgment to come to a conclusion. The second difficulty with effective decision-making is falling into the trap of seeking consensus. Consensus means that you're basically waiting for everyone to kind of agree. But that doesn't really work because most high-risk big decisions are first a very collaborative process where no one person is going to just go and make the decision. You have to consult a lot of people, you have to get input from a lot of people, and different people have different opinions. The more people you involve in the process, the more likely you're going to have a lot of back and forth and differing opinions. And I think there's disagreement is good, but what I've experienced tends to happen is that sometimes you go off with just the goal to get everyone's agreement from the start and please everyone. So if you're striving for agreement from the start for tough decisions, you may not decide on the best path because others may not even share their opinion in order to just maintain harmony and agree with everything. And there have definitely been decisions where I was aware that some of our stakeholders would push back on the plan, but it was still important to go ahead with it and just make sure we get alignment, even if others disagree. So getting consensus doesn't really work. It can take too long. Sometimes you will just not end up making decision if you're striving to just please everyone. So what's really important is not to get agreement or get agreement from everyone, but more to understand why you're going a certain route and be okay with making trade-offs that comes with any decision. And finally, effective decision-making is hard because we're human and we all have inherent biases. So research has shown that there's dozens of mental hacks that our mind plays when making decisions that cause us to make irrational choices. There's 3 biases that I want to talk to you about that I feel that I've definitely encountered in my experience making decisions with a group and just by myself too. So the first one is confirmation bias, which is one of the most common biases that exist, which talks about that we believe what we want to believe by favoring information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. So for example, if you think your customers want more gamification, then you will seek out evidence that prove you're right, and you're likely to kind of ignore some of the evidence that might have a different opinion. And so just keeping track of this bias is really important because you see that pop up in discussions when you have with other people and when you're in the room making decisions. The other one that I think is really common that shows up is called the IKEA effect, which is a bias that explains why people place higher value on things they help to build or create and are attracted to it. It's inspired by the IKEA furniture that everybody has to build themselves. So during a typical decision-making process, people are assigned researching or exploring a single option. So you may have 4 people and each of them are looking up as 4 different options. So sometimes the fact that each person is assigned to an option may make them kind of more emotionally attached to that decision or that option, causing them to avoid the bigger picture and think objectively about what's in the best interest for the customer or the stakeholder. And sometimes I've been in meetings where we're making a decision with people who have built a certain product that is on the table as an option. And that option definitely gets favored by that person just because they're more attached to it because they've built it. And the third one is the status quo, which really, it means you're favoring the current situation and you don't really want to change anything and you want to just maintain it due to this loss aversion. So sometimes people hate something more than they enjoy gaining something of equal value. So you might be afraid of a decision to cut project because of a lost investment rather than viewing it as something that frees up your resources. So these are some of the kind of traps that I've found make it difficult to make effective decisions. And it's important to kind of keep these in mind the next time you're involved or responsible for a big decision. So when making big decisions, you want to make sure that you take into account 4 points that I will go over one by one. The first is to ask questions and set the parameters. The second is to evaluate options and then make a decision. And then once you've made a decision, you want to get commitment from everyone and then communicate that. And the fourth is to revisit and just continue learning from that. So I want to go over some of these one by one. So the first important thing is to ask questions and set the parameters. You want to lay out the roles beforehand. I've been in many meetings where before we were trying to make decisions as a group without any clarity on who is actually going to make the decision and who are the people that I need input from. And so what happens is you have endless meetings where you're just going back and forth and you continue to discuss options that may be on the table, but nobody knows who's going to make the decision, when that decision is needed by. Are we looping in all the people we need to get information from? So it's really important to understand the people involved in the process and the roles they're playing. You want to make sure you're clear what type of decision you're making. Is it a binary go-no-go decision, or are you evaluating multiple options or prioritizing from a list of options? There are different types of decisions. So a yes-no decision will generally have 2 options, yes or no. Prioritization may have a list of options that you kind of rank them. So you also want to make sure you kind of understand who are the key decision makers and who are the people you need to consult for making the decision, and who are all the stakeholders you need to inform, who are the people who are actually going to make the decision. So there are multiple roles involved in the decision-making process. So the RICI framework and the RAPID framework that you see here are 2 very common frameworks that are used in decision-making. I don't think you have to use them word by word, but it's good to kind of help you understand what kind of roles are involved in a decision-making process. You see here, some people are responsible for the decision, some are accountable. There are some people you have to consult in order to make the decision because they may have the most information on the problem that you're trying to solve. And there are people that you want to inform because they may be actually, depending on the decision you make, implementing it. So it's useful in this first step, to also list out a few business goals that you think will be impacted by your decision. When you frame the decision around what's most important, it helps you avoid the trap of rationalizing things after the fact that you've made the decision. Okay, so once you've kind of asked all these basic questions and you understand who are the people involved, what roles they play, by when do we need the decision made, and what information is most important, you want to write down your options and then decide. In general, big decisions are more collaborative and involve a lot more people than just one person making a decision and moving on. So it's good to bring in everyone to the group to brainstorm options. Some options sometimes may be fairly obvious if you're deciding, but there are sometimes collectively brainstorming can also bring up some options that you may have not thought of before that may be very feasible options. Then you want to present all the options and evaluate them so that you kind of understand the pros and cons for each. This is where the people who need to be consulted come into play, because they are the ones who will give you input on what each option is, which option has what benefits, what cons, so that you can kind of assess each of the option that you're evaluating. There are multiple ways to assess options. I've used just a pros, cons list to address amongst different options. There's a framework called weighted decision matrix that's also pretty common if you're looking at options that have multiple set of criteria that you want to evaluate them against, or even with the group, just voting or getting ranking with the group is some of the options that you can use to assess all the different criteria and options that you're evaluating. And generally, I found documenting all of this in a document helps bring clarity across the board. So once you've laid out your options and done the assessment with the group, you want to make sure that the decision makers have this information to make the call. So let's say you have a Word document where you kind of laid out the problem, you've laid out all the options, and you've evaluated them based on a pros cons list, or you've ranked them from most important option to the least important option. Then you want to make sure that the decision maker has this information so they can make the decision. In some cases, you as the product owner will probably be the decision maker. So this exercise will help you kind of understand the big picture so that you can make the decision. In other cases, it may be a very difficult engineering call where both the product owner and the engineering counterpart are both decision makers, or maybe it's just the engineering counterpart that needs to make the final call. And in some cases, I've been it's actually the leadership team that makes the decision, and you're the ones kind of presenting all the information in a clear and concise manner. So once you've kind of evaluated the options and presented it to whoever the decision maker is, you've basically made the decision on which option you're going to go with or how you're going to prioritize the option. So once you've kind of made the decision, you want to make sure you get commitment from all stakeholders, even if they've voted or were in favor of another option. Generally in decision making, all the stakeholders and people who are consulted, they may favor different options during the decision making process. But once a decision is made, it's really, really important to make sure that you get commitment from everybody, all the roles that the people are playing, so that you're all moving in one direction and there's no ambiguity after you've made the decision. And you also want to make sure you inform all stakeholders of the process, options, and the decision made. In the past, I've used a document that kind of keeps track of all the key people and roles involved, and the changes made to the decision. So just a simple table like this at the start of a document that talks about who are the reviewers, what roles they play, and have they committed or signed off, can help you keep track of all the people involved. And in the future, if there are questions or this decision gets brought up, you can always come back to it and kind of talk through what was the thinking, who were the people involved. So it's really important after a decision is made to, one, get commitment from everybody that was involved in the process to agree that this is the decision we're moving forward with, and also to communicate to everybody who will be working on this decision, who needs to be informed, who will be accountable, that this is what we've done, this is the decision we've made, and this is what the plan is. And I think the last step is really to revisit and learn. Often what I've found in my experiences, once we've had these big decisions, we've kind of made that, we've had this big process that we follow, and then we just forget about it. But it's important to kind of revisit it and look back, maybe check back, follow up in a few months to see where things are. Things are always changing. So the earlier you follow up and reevaluate things, the better you're in a position to course correct if you need to. So it's important to just make sure to check in after some time, how that decision is landing. Maybe there's a macroeconomic change. For example, nobody would have predicted the COVID-19 virus last year, and that has impacted a lot of plans in a lot of companies in a lot of business areas. So learning about that and evaluating that early on will help you kind of course correct in time so that you minimize the damage. And it's in this case also just having that document written, you can always go back to it, justify it, make changes through that plan. All right, so that's all I had. I hope that you've learned something valuable, and this is really all of my learnings of how I've kind of made decisions in the past and what I've learned and what I continue to kind of implement at my work. I'm happy to connect with everyone, so feel free to reach out on the LinkedIn and Twitter handles posted here. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.